There is one prayer you stopped mentioning. Not because it stopped mattering. Not because you suddenly stopped believing in God. You stopped mentioning it because every time you thought about it, something inside you hurt. You had asked before. You had waited before. You had watched days become weeks, weeks become months, and perhaps months become years. Eventually, you learned how to continue living while quietly carrying the disappointment. But on August 19th, the narrator says Archangel Michael comes with an urgent message. Do not confuse silence with abandonment. Because the miracle you buried beneath the words, "Maybe it just wasn't meant for me," may not be as finished as you believe. And here is where the message becomes impossible to ignore. 3 days ago, something shifted. You did not hear thunder. You did not see the sky open. Your phone may not have rung. Your circumstances may have looked exactly the same. You may even have gone to sleep believing another ordinary day had passed. Yet heaven's timing has never depended upon visible evidence. Scripture repeatedly shows that God can begin moving long before human eyes recognize what He is doing. Think about it. How many times have you checked for an answer and found nothing? How many mornings have you awakened hoping, maybe today, only to end the evening telling yourself not to expect too much tomorrow? There comes a point when disappointment teaches the heart to protect itself. You stop checking. You stop talking about it. You stop imagining what it would feel like if the answer finally came. And that is exactly why this message carries such weight. The narrator describes Michael standing at the threshold of this forgotten hope, not bringing panic, but awakening. His message is clear. Look again. Not because you should chase signs. Not because every coincidence is a prophecy. But because disappointment may have convinced you to close your heart before God finished writing the story. August 19th becomes your spiritual checkpoint. Here is something you once prayed for with tears in your eyes. Something you pictured happening so many times that you can still remember exactly how you thought it would feel. Perhaps it concerned restoration. Perhaps a door you desperately wanted open. Perhaps your family. Perhaps Kavian. Perhaps a dream you quietly placed on the shelf because continuing to hope became more painful than letting it go. You told yourself you had moved on. But did you? Because sometimes the dreams we claim to have forgotten are simply dreams we became afraid to touch. And now comes the question that will follow you through this entire message. What if God was still working during the season when you stopped watching? The third day carries powerful resurrection imagery throughout the biblical story, an image of what appears finished giving way to something no human strength could manufacture. That does not mean you should demand that God fulfill every desire exactly as you imagined it. It means you should never allow disappointment to convince you that God has exhausted His possibilities. Michael's warning, as the narrator presents it, is there for naught. Be afraid or you will miss your miracle. It is something deeper. Do not let yesterday's disappointment make you spiritually unavailable for tomorrow's answer. Something may already be changing that you cannot yet measure. A conversation may eventually happen. Clarity may arrive. A different door may appear. The answer itself may look completely different from the version you rehearsed in your mind. But before any outward change comes, something must awaken inside you first. Hope. Not reckless hope. Not desperate hope. Not the kind of hope that needs a sign every 5 minutes to survive. Faith-rooted hope. The kind that can whisper, "God, I do not know what you are doing. I do not know when you will do it. I do not even know whether the answer will look the way I once imagined. But I refuse to declare the story finished before you do." And beloved, this is only the beginning. Because the next revelation explains why you became tired of hoping in the first place. and why the moment you almost surrendered may have been far more important than you realized. Type "I receive renewed hope" in the comments if this message speaks to your heart. Blessing code 819 symbolizes renewed faith, watchfulness, and expectation. There was a moment when you stopped asking. Nobody noticed it because nothing dramatic happened. You did not announce that your faith was tired. You did not wake up one morning and declare that you were finished believing. It happened quietly. One day you realized you had gone several nights without mentioning that prayer. You stopped checking for the answer. You stopped imagining the breakthrough. And when someone asked about the situation, you learned to smile and say, "Whatever happens, happens." But heaven saw what those words were covering. They were not indifference. They were exhaustion. You had hoped so intensely that eventually hope itself began to hurt. Archangel Michael, as the narrator reveals, draws attention to that hidden moment because it explains why August 19th matters so deeply. Before hope can rise again, you must understand what buried it. You prayed when nothing changed. You remained faithful when there was no evidence. You encouraged other people while secretly wondering when your own answer would arrive. You watched someone else receive what you had been asking for, and although you celebrated them, a quiet question entered your heart. "God, when will it be my turn?" You tried not to become bitter. You tried not to compare. You tried to keep believing. But disappointment accumulated slowly, until expecting nothing seemed safer than being disappointed again. And perhaps that is where you are now. You still believe in God, but you became cautious about believing for that particular thing. There is a difference. Your faith did not disappear. Your heart simply built a wall around the place that had been wounded. You told yourself you were surrendering, but somewhere beneath, that surrender was self-protection. If you stopped expecting the call, the silence could not hurt you. If you stopped imagining the door opening, another closed door could not crush you. If you stopped praying specifically, another unanswered night could not leave you asking why. But Scripture is filled with people who knew this territory. Abraham knew what it meant to carry a promise through years that seemed to contradict it. Hannah knew what it meant to pray from an aching place while watching another person possess what she desperately desired. Joseph knew what it meant to receive a dream and then experience circumstances that looked like the opposite of that dream. Their stories remind you of something essential. Waiting can feel like abandonment when you are standing inside it, yet a chapter of waiting is not enough information to judge the entire story. That is why the narrator describes Michael's message not as condemnation, but as a summons back to spiritual attention. He does not accuse you for becoming tired. He points toward the place where your expectation collapsed and says, "Look here again." Because there is something you need to recognize. Exhaustion does not erase the prayers you prayed sincerely. Tears do not invalidate faith. Questions do not automatically make you faithless. Even Scripture gives language to people who cried, "How long?" There are moments when faith is not shouting confidently. Sometimes faith is simply refusing to completely close the door. And this is where the mystery intensifies. What if the season in which you heard nothing was not empty? What if your inability to see movement never proved there was no movement? You measured the situation by what appeared in front of you because that was all you could see. No message arrived. No opportunity appeared. No obvious breakthrough happened. So your mind reached the most understandable conclusion. Nothing is changing. But you cannot see every conversation, every preparation, every redirection, every circumstance that may eventually connect to the answer. August 19th, therefore, carries a challenge for your heart. Can you become open again without becoming desperate? Can you hope without demanding? Can you pray without attempting to control the outcome? Can you say, God, I place this back into your hands, without deciding beforehand exactly how he must answer? That is stronger faith than obsessively searching for signs. It is faith capable of standing in uncertainty while remaining anchored, because the miracle may not arrive in the shape you once imagined. The relationship you wanted restored may become the wisdom to finally release it. The opportunity you wanted may be replaced by a better direction. The provision you prayed for may arrive through a path you never considered. Or perhaps something you truly thought was finished will unexpectedly reopen. The point is not to predict God's method. The point is to stop allowing old disappointment to declare what God can or cannot do next. And now the narrator says Michael turns your attention toward the phrase you have not been able to forget. 3 days ago. Why 3 days? Why does the timing matter? Why does Scripture repeatedly surround the third day with imagery of reversal, restoration, and resurrection? That mystery is where the next revelation begins. Because what you called finished may have reached the very place where renewed hope begins. Type "My hope is rising" again in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 333 symbolizes renewed expectation, endurance, and faith while you wait. 3 days ago. Those words have been following this message like a quiet echo. And now the narrator says Archangel Michael draws your attention directly toward them. Why 3 days? Why would the moment you cannot see matter more than the moment you can? Because some of the greatest reversals in Scripture began while human eyes were still staring at circumstances that appeared completely finished. There are moments when nothing visible has changed, yet the story is no longer standing where it stood before. And this is the mystery surrounding August 19th. What if you are judging today by evidence that belongs to yesterday? You may have awakened 3 days ago without feeling anything extraordinary. You handled your responsibilities. You checked your phone. You thought about bills, family, work, unfinished conversations, and everything demanding your attention. Perhaps the prayer you once carried never even crossed your mind. Yet the narrator presents Michael's message as an invitation to remember a biblical pattern. God does not require visible movement before he begins his work. The seed moves beneath the soil before the field shows green. Dawn begins beyond the horizon before light reaches your window. Preparation can exist before manifestation, and that means silence alone cannot tell you what God is doing. The third day carries extraordinary imagery throughout Scripture. Most powerfully, the resurrection of Jesus transforms the third day into an enduring picture of hope after apparent finality. The stone, the sealed tomb, and the grief of those who love him all seem to announce an ending. Yet the ending they saw was not the ending God had written. This does not mean every personal desire is guaranteed to resurrect exactly as you want it. It means the believer must remain humble enough to acknowledge that God can create possibilities beyond what present circumstances appear to permit. And that is where this message reaches the place you tried to bury. You had your own version of a sealed door. You looked at something and decided, there is nothing more to expect here. Perhaps the evidence supported that conclusion. Perhaps you had waited so long that accepting the ending felt necessary. But Michael's symbolic warning is not commanding you to force that door open. He is telling you not to make disappointment your prophet. Do not allow yesterday's pain to speak with God's authority over tomorrow. Something can change before you recognize it. A decision can be reconsidered before you hear about it. An opportunity can begin forming before your name is mentioned. Your own heart can start healing before you notice that you are breathing more freely. A path can be redirected while you still believe you are standing in the same place. This is why discernment matters. You do not need to call every coincidence a sign. You do not need to become anxious, watching every notification and interpreting every conversation. You need something stronger than anxious expectation, steady faith. The narrator says Michael now points toward August 19th and declares, "Wake up your expectation, but surrender your timetable." A distinction changes everything. Expectation says God is able. Control says God must do it exactly this way. Faith says God can surprise you. Fear says you must discover every hidden detail immediately. You are being called away from fear and back toward trust. If something truly is changing, you will not need paranoia to recognize it. What is from God can withstand prayer, wisdom, patience, and truth. Perhaps that is the real confirmation your heart needs first. Before circumstances change around you, something must change within you. You must become willing to believe that the chapter after disappointment can contain something besides more disappointment. You must become willing to stop rehearsing the sentence, "Nothing ever works for me." You must stop turning one closed door into a prophecy over every door ahead. The miracle you surrendered to God does not need your obsession to survive. Your assignment is not to manipulate the outcome. Your assignment is to remain faithful enough to receive whatever God reveals next. So when August 19th arrives, do not approach it trembling as though one calendar date controls your destiny. Approach it awake. Pray. Listen. Observe. Continue living. Let the date remind you that resurrection faith does not deny reality. It simply refuses to declare that present reality is the limit of God's power. 3 days ago may represent the point where your attention begins turning from what died toward what God can still create. And what comes next will reveal why the prayer you almost forgot may still have something important to teach you about divine timing. Type "I am ready to hope" again in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 333 symbolizes resurrection hope, renewed faith, and spiritual watchfulness. And if renewed hope is being planted in you through this message, imagine another weary soul discovering that same light at the exact moment they are ready to surrender. Scripture reminds us that those who sow generously can participate in a harvest extending far beyond what their own eyes will ever see. If your heart says, "I want to help carry this word farther," you can support this mission through the PayPal donation link placed in every video description or through the QR code in the bottom right corner of this video. Let your support become a seed that helps biblical encouragement reach someone sitting alone in a season of silence. Giving does not purchase a miracle or activate God's favor. Grace cannot be bought, and every gift should come freely from the heart. May every willing giver be strengthened in wisdom, generosity, peace, and faithful stewardship as that seed helps another person encounter hope. If you feel genuinely led to help spread the message, use the PayPal link or QR code and help carry this light to the next waiting heart. There is a prayer hidden somewhere in your history that you rarely speak anymore. You remember when it was different. There was a season when that prayer followed you everywhere. You whispered it before sleeping. You carried it into the morning. You repeated it while driving, working, washing dishes, walking through the house, or staring silently into the darkness. You did not need anyone to remind you what you wanted God to do because the desire lived constantly inside you. But eventually something changed. The prayer became quieter. The expectation became smaller. And without realizing it, you placed that request somewhere deep inside your heart and continued living as though the answer would never come. Now the narrator says Archangel Michael points toward that forgotten place and declares, "Do not mistake your silence for God's forgetfulness." You may have stopped repeating the prayer, but that does not mean the season taught you nothing. You may have stopped expecting the outcome, but the years of waiting shaped your discernment, exposed your attachments, strengthened your endurance, and revealed what you truly valued. What you thought was wasted time may have been producing something within you that an immediate answer never could have produced. Perhaps you know exactly which prayer this is. Maybe it concerns a relationship you once begged God to restore. Maybe it concerns financial stability after years of struggling to breathe beneath responsibility. Maybe you prayed for your family to heal, for an opportunity to arrive, for direction to become clear, or for a dream that seemed repeatedly pushed beyond your reach. Whatever it was, there came a moment when saying the words became exhausting. So you surrendered them. Yet surrender does not mean God becomes incapable of surprising you. Isaiah reminds believers that God's thoughts and ways rise beyond human understanding. Habakkuk speaks of vision waiting for its appointed time and urges patience even when fulfillment appears delayed. Those passages do not promise that every personal desire will happen exactly as requested. They reveal something more dependable. Your limited view of timing cannot contain the whole wisdom of God. You see today. God sees consequences you cannot see. You see one door. God sees every road beyond it. You see what you lost. God also sees what that loss prevented, prepared, exposed, or redirected. And this is where August 19th becomes more than an exciting date. It becomes an invitation to revisit your posture. Michael's symbolic message does not tell you to dig up every old desire and demand its resurrection. It tells you to place what still matters back into God's hands without attempting to control what happens next. There is enormous freedom in praying, Lord, if this belongs in my future, lead me toward it. If it does not, give me something better than my attachment to it. Because perhaps the greatest miracle will not be receiving exactly what you requested. Perhaps the miracle will be discovering why God did not answer it in the form you expected. Perhaps the door returns. Perhaps another door appears. Perhaps reconciliation becomes possible. Perhaps peace arrives instead. Perhaps the opportunity you mourn becomes insignificant beside what eventually replaces it. You cannot know yet, and that uncertainty is precisely where faith becomes necessary. The narrator describes Michael standing beside the door you stopped checking. His message is not that you should pound upon it again. His message is, stop staring at the ground as though there are no more doors. You have spent enough time assuming disappointment knows your future. It does not. Rejection does not know your future. Delay does not know your future. Another person's decision does not possess authority over everything God can still build from your life. Remember what happened to your heart when you first believed. Before disappointment taught you caution, there was something alive inside you. There was courage. There was expectation. There was a willingness to imagine life beyond your present circumstances. Heaven is not calling you back into naivete. You have learned too much for that. You are being called into mature expectation, hope with wisdom, faith with patience, openness with discernment. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you will speak that prayer again. Not desperately, not bargaining, not demanding a sign by morning. Simply honestly, you may say, God, you remember what I stopped talking about. You know why I became tired. If there is still purpose connected to this prayer, show me how to walk forward. And if your answer is different from mine, prepare my heart to recognize it. That prayer requires courage because it gives God permission to surprise you. And the next part of this message reveals why the silence may have lasted longer than you ever believed you could endure. Because sometimes the question is not merely, when will the answer come? Sometimes the deeper question is, who are you becoming while you wait for it? Type God. I trust your timing in the comments if this message speaks to your heart. Blessing code 555 symbolizes surrender, renewed courage, and faithful expectation. There is a question you may have been afraid to ask because you thought asking it would make you sound ungrateful. God, why did this have to take so long? You could understand waiting for a little while. You could understand one closed door, one disappointing season, one unexpected detour. But this became longer than you prepared for. You watched calendars change while the same prayer remained unanswered. You watched other people move into seasons you thought you would have entered by now. And somewhere inside that long silence, you began wondering whether there was any purpose left in waiting. The narrator says Archangel Michael now brings your attention to something you could not recognize while you were living through it. Not every silent season is empty. Silence can feel cruel when you desperately need clarity, but hidden seasons can accomplish work that visible breakthroughs cannot. There were things inside you that needed strengthening before certain things could safely be placed into your hands. There were attachments you could not recognize until disappointment exposed them. There were people you thought you needed whose absence eventually taught you that your identity could not remain dependent upon their approval. Think about who you were when you first prayed that prayer. You wanted the answer immediately because you believed receiving it would solve everything. You imagined the open door, the restored relationship, the financial breakthrough, the recognition, the opportunity, or the change, and you thought, once this happens, I will finally have peace. But what if peace had to become something deeper than a reward attached to circumstances? What if God wanted your foundation strengthened before your surroundings changed? What if the waiting was teaching you how to remain standing when external conditions could no longer hold you up? This does not mean every delay was directly sent by God. Human choices have consequences. Circumstances can be complicated. Sometimes doors close because they simply were not right. But faith allows you to believe that God can still work through what He did not cause. Romans 8:28 does not tell believers that everything they experience is good. It points toward a God capable of working through circumstances for good according to His purpose. That distinction matters, because it means your painful season does not have to be meaningless simply because you would never have chosen it. The narrator describes Michael looking back over the road behind you and saying, "Notice what survived. You survived days you once thought would break you. You learned to make decisions without receiving everyone's approval. You discovered which relationships remained when you had nothing impressive to offer. You became more careful about where you placed your trust. You learned that urgency can make the wrong door look attractive. You learned that loneliness can tempt people to reopen relationships they were finally healing from. And somewhere through all of this, your discernment became sharper. Now imagine receiving your answer before learning those lessons. Would you have recognized the difference between opportunity and distraction? Would you have protected what you received? Would you have walked away from manipulation? Would you have known when to say yes and when to say no? Sometimes people pray intensely for an open door without realizing that preparation determines what happens after the door opens. Receiving something is one moment. Stewarding it requires maturity. That is why the silence cannot simply be labeled punishment. Perhaps some of it was protection. Perhaps some with preparation. Perhaps some redirected you towards something you could not see. Perhaps some remains mysterious, and you may never receive a complete explanation. Faith does not require inventing explanations God has not given. It asks whether you can continue trusting His character even when every detail remains unresolved. And now August 19th stands before you differently. Earlier, you might have approached this moment saying, "God, finally give me what I asked for." But something has matured. And now your prayer can become, "God, make me ready for whatever you know is right." That prayer carries less desperation and more strength. It does not abandon expectation. It purifies expectation. It removes the demand that your future must resemble the picture you created during your most vulnerable season. Michael's symbolic message becomes urgent here because disappointment can make people rush when movement finally appears. Do not do that. If a door opens, pray before entering. If someone returns, examine what has actually changed. If an opportunity appears, use wisdom. If money comes, steward it carefully. If clarity arrives, do not ignore it merely because it challenges what you once wanted. Preparation is part of answered prayer. You thought the silence meant nothing was happening. Yet look at who you are becoming. The person who first entered this waiting season may not have been ready for what the person listening now can carry. And the next revelation goes deeper, because August 19th is not being presented as a deadline for God. It is a wake-up call for you. Something may begin moving again, and this time you must recognize movement without allowing excitement to overpower discernment. Type "I trust the preparation" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 717 symbolizes wisdom, endurance, preparation, and peace while God directs your next steps. August 19th is approaching, but the narrator says Archangel Michael wants you to understand something before expectation turns into anxiety. This date is not being placed before you so that you spend every hour staring at your phone, searching the sky, or treating every unusual moment as supernatural confirmation. August 19th is a wake-up call. It is a marker reminding you to become attentive again after disappointment trained you to expect nothing. The danger was never simply that you waited too long. The greater danger is that waiting made you so accustomed to closed doors that you might fail to recognize when something finally begins moving. Think about how disappointment changes behavior. After enough unanswered messages, you stop checking. After enough rejection, you stop applying. After enough conversations that lead nowhere, you stop expecting anyone to understand. After enough financial pressure, you become suspicious of every possibility. After enough prayers seem unanswered, you may continue praying while quietly preparing yourself for another no. You call it realism, but sometimes it is wounded expectation wearing the clothes of wisdom. Michael's symbolic warning reaches directly into that place and says, stay awake. Do not let what happened before determine what you are capable of recognizing now. Something beginning to move does not necessarily arrive with thunder. Sometimes movement looks ordinary at first. It may be an idea that suddenly becomes clear after months of confusion. It may be a conversation that finally becomes possible. It may be courage returning where fear had dominated. It may be an opportunity worth carefully examining. It may simply be the realization that the thing you were desperately trying to recover is no longer what your heart truly needs. Do not underestimate quiet movement. A changed heart can be as significant as a changed circumstance. This is why August 19th must not become superstition. God is not controlled by a date, and your destiny does not collapse if nothing dramatic happens before midnight. The urgency lies somewhere deeper. You are being called to wake up spiritually, emotionally, and practically. You are being invited to notice what deserves prayerful attention instead of dismissing everything because previous seasons disappointed you. There is a difference between chasing signs and becoming attentive. One creates anxiety. The other develops discernment. The narrator describes Michael standing like a watchman and saying, "Observe without fear." That phrase matters. If you receive unexpected communication, you do not need to immediately declare it your miracle. Listen first. If an old opportunity returns, you do not need to rush through the door. Examine it. If someone who disappeared suddenly comes back, you do not need to assume heaven sent them. Look for truth, consistency, accountability, and peace. What is genuinely good does not need your desperation to make it valuable. You have changed during the waiting. That means what once impressed you may no longer impress you. What once tempted you may no longer have power over you. What once looked like the only answer may now appear surprisingly small compared with what God has developed inside you. This is one reason renewed movement requires renewed discernment. You cannot evaluate tomorrow exclusively with the mindset you carried yesterday. Remember Elijah's encounter in 1 Kings 19. The dramatic wind came, then the earthquake, then the fire, yet the divine encounter was associated with a quiet voice afterward. There is wisdom in that picture for this moment. You may expect your answer to arrive loudly because your waiting has been painful. But do not become so fascinated with dramatic signs that you overlook quiet wisdom. Sometimes the next step is not spectacular. It is simply clear. So as August 19th draws near, return to prayer without panic. Ask God to make you attentive to what is healthy, truthful, and aligned with wisdom. Ask Him to close what should remain closed. Ask Him to expose your own impatience before it makes decisions for you. Ask for courage to walk through the right door and equal courage to leave the wrong one untouched. This is not passive waiting anymore. This is prepared watchfulness. And perhaps the first thing moving again will not happen outside you at all. Perhaps you will wake and realize you want to try again. Perhaps creativity returns. Perhaps you finally make the call you have responsibly postponed. Do not dismiss that awakening. Sometimes before circumstances change, God restores the person who must walk through them. The narrator says Michael now leaves you with one urgent instruction. Keep your eyes open, but keep your peace stronger than your expectation. You do not have to manufacture a miracle. You do not have to force August 19th to prove anything. You simply need to remain available to truth. Because the next part carries an unexpected reversal. The door you mourn may truly have closed, but that does not mean it was the final door. And what waits beyond the ending you resisted may reveal why God never required that old door to reopen. Type "My eyes are open and my heart is at peace" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 819 symbolizes spiritual watchfulness, patient faith, wisdom, and courage for the road ahead. There is a door in your memory that still hurts when you think about it. You prayed over it. You prepared for it. You imagined yourself walking through it so many times that when it finally closed, the disappointment felt personal. Maybe it was an opportunity that disappeared without explanation. Maybe someone walked away after you believed restoration was near. Maybe you received the rejection you feared, watched a plan collapse, or realized something you had invested years into was not going to happen the way you expected. And somewhere inside that moment, you made a painful conclusion. That was my chance. I missed it. It is over. But the narrator says Archangel Michael now interrupts that conclusion with a question. What if the door really did close, but it was never the final door? You have been asking God to reopen something because you assumed restoration could only mean getting back what you lost. But restoration does not always return you to the old room. Sometimes restoration gives you the strength to stop standing outside a door that no longer belongs to your future. Sometimes the miracle is not hearing the lock turn behind you. Sometimes the miracle is finally noticing the corridor continues. This is where Scripture challenges the way people interpret endings. Joseph entered a pit that looked nothing like his dream. Then came slavery, then prison. If Joseph had judged his future by any one of those chapters, he could have concluded that the promise was finished. Yet the place that looked like confinement did not possess the authority to write his final chapter. His story continued beyond what he could see. Think also about Lazarus. By the time Jesus arrived, those surrounding the situation believed the opportunity had passed. Martha even spoke from that painful place. If Jesus had been there earlier, perhaps things would have been different. That sentence sounds familiar, does it not? If only it had happened earlier. If only that person had stayed. If only I had received the opportunity then. If only God had answered before everything fell apart. Human beings naturally build alternate histories around disappointment. But God is not trapped inside your if only. And above every biblical image of apparent finality stands the cross. To those watching on that Friday, it looked like hope itself had been defeated. They could not yet see resurrection morning from the place where they were standing. Their limited view did not make their grief unreal, but their grief did not possess complete information about what came next. That is the spiritual tension Michael's symbolic message places before you now. You are allowed to acknowledge that something closed. You are allowed to grieve it. Faith does not require pretending rejection did not hurt. But grief and prophecy are not the same thing. Your pain can describe what happened without being given authority to predict everything that will happen. August 19th therefore carries another layer of meaning. Perhaps you have been watching the wrong door. Perhaps you became so focused on whether one specific situation would return that you stopped noticing what was developing elsewhere. You kept asking, when will this reopen? While life quietly asked, are you willing to look in another direction? The narrator says Michael now speaks with authority. Do not force what God is asking you to release. That is essential. Hope is not permission to chase someone who has clearly chosen distance. Faith is not an excuse to ignore boundaries, warning signs, or wisdom. Believing God can restore does not mean insisting that restoration must involve the exact person, position, opportunity, or circumstance you lost. Sometimes the most powerful answer to prayer is the grace to walk away without bitterness. Look carefully at what the closed door taught you. You know more now. You recognize patterns faster. You understand what peace feels like because you remember what confusion cost you. You have discovered that desperation can make almost any opening look divine. But you are not that version of yourself anymore. You do not need every door. You need the right one. So stop measuring your future by what refused you. Stop treating rejection like a permanent verdict over your worth. Stop standing spiritually outside one locked entrance while asking, my God has forgotten you. Turn your head. Lift your eyes. Pray for perspective. There may be possibilities you could not recognize while all your attention was attached to what disappeared. And here is the curiosity that carries you into what comes next. What happens if the old door suddenly opens again? What happens if the person returns? The opportunity resurfaces, or something you once desperately wanted becomes available? Will you automatically call it your answered prayer? Michael's next warning is crucial. Do not let yesterday's disappointment make tomorrow's decisions for you. Because sometimes the test is not whether you can survive a closed door. Sometimes the test is whether you have enough discernment to decide wisely when the door opens again. Type I trust God with the right door in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 777 symbolizes discernment, courage, renewed direction, and peace for the path ahead. There is something more dangerous than a closed door, and it is entering the next open door while still thinking like the person who was wounded by the last one. The narrator says Archangel Michael brings this warning with unusual urgency because August 19th is not only about recognizing movement. It is about recognizing what your disappointment may try to do when movement appears. You prayed for another opportunity, but when it arrives, will fear tell you it cannot be trusted? You prayed for restoration, but if a conversation becomes possible, will loneliness make you ignore everything you learned? You prayed for change, but when change requires courage, will yesterday convince you to retreat? You must understand what long disappointment can do to the heart. It can make protection feel like wisdom even when protection has become isolation. It can make suspicion feel like discernment. It can convince you that expecting the worst is the safest way to avoid being hurt again. After enough rejection, you begin rejecting possibilities before they could reject you. After enough betrayal, you may assume everyone carries hidden motives. After enough disappointment, even good news can make you nervous because part of you immediately wonders what will go wrong. But Michael's symbolic message is clear. Do not carry yesterday's wound into tomorrow's decision. This does not mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to let pain become your only counselor. Wisdom remembers. Wisdom examines. Wisdom establishes boundaries. But fear assumes every new chapter must repeat the previous one. You have come too far to allow an old experience to possess that much authority. This becomes especially important if something from your past returns. Perhaps someone reaches out. Perhaps an opportunity appears. Perhaps a door you once begged to enter suddenly becomes available. Your first emotional response may be powerful because old hopes can awaken quickly. But pause. Pray. Observe. Restoration without evidence of change can simply become repetition. Forgiveness does not require immediate access. Compassion does not eliminate boundaries. Faith does not demand that you ignore wisdom. The narrator describes Michael standing between your emotions and your next decision, saying, "You are allowed to wait for clarity. You do not have to answer everything immediately. You do not have to interpret every unexpected event as the miracle mentioned in this message. What comes from God does not need manipulation, panic, or spiritual pressure to make you accept it. Truth can withstand examination. Healthy opportunity can withstand wisdom. And there is another danger. You may reject something good simply because it looks different from what you originally requested. You became attached to one picture of the answer. One person. One path. One timeline. One outcome. But what if God's provision arrives through another direction? If your hands remain clenched around yesterday's picture, you may struggle to receive tomorrow's reality. This is why August 19th becomes a moment of surrender before it becomes a moment of expectation. Say within your heart, "God, I want what is true more than what is familiar. I want what is healthy more than what is emotionally irresistible. I want your wisdom more than my preferred outcome." That prayer protects you from both extremes. Fear that rejects everything and desperation that accepts anything. 2 Timothy reminds believers that God has not given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Notice that combination. Spiritual courage is not reckless. Love is not blind. A sound mind matters. You can be hopeful and thoughtful. You can believe and verify. You can forgive and maintain boundaries. You can remain spiritually open without becoming emotionally vulnerable to every person who knows how to speak the language of your old desires. The miracle you gave up hoping for may ultimately teach you something greater than how to receive. It may teach you how to discern. Because sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is not this way. And sometimes the greatest evidence of growth is realizing you no longer need what you once begged God to give you. So when something begins moving, remain peaceful. Do not rush because the title said urgent. Let the urgency awaken your attention, not override your judgment. Michael's warning is not calling you into panic. It is calling you into readiness. Yesterday taught you. Tomorrow will test what you learned. And the next revelation will challenge your expectations even further, because the miracle may arrive looking nothing like the miracle you originally imagined. Type "I choose wisdom over fear" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 888 symbolizes discernment, courage, peace, and spiritual clarity. If this message has helped you guard your hope without surrendering your wisdom, there may be another discouraged heart that needs these words tonight. Scripture gives us the image of seed becoming harvest, and one act of generosity can help carry biblical encouragement farther than you may ever personally see. If something within you says, "I want to help this light reach another soul," you can support this mission through the PayPal donation link in every video description or the QR code displayed in the bottom right corner of this video. Your gift does not purchase favor, unlock a miracle, or earn God's blessing. Grace remains God's gift, freely given. Instead, let your support be a voluntary act of generosity that helps another person encounter hope when their own light feels faint. May those who give do so with peace, wisdom, and a joyful heart, trusting God with the harvest their generosity may help produce. If you feel freely led to strengthen this mission, use the PayPal link or QR code and help carry the message forward. There is one final attachment to your old prayer that must be loosened before you can recognize what may be coming next. The picture in your mind of exactly how the answer was supposed to happen. You did not merely pray for a miracle. Somewhere along the way, you designed it. You imagined who would call, which door would reopen, how the money would arrive, what the conversation would sound like, and how quickly everything would change afterward. Without realizing it, you became so familiar with your preferred version of the answer that anything different began to look like no answer at all. And now the narrator says Archangel Michael brings a powerful warning. Do not reject provision simply because it arrives wearing unfamiliar clothes. Perhaps you prayed for one relationship to be restored because you believed that person was essential to your happiness. But what if the deeper answer is healing? It finally releases you from needing a return. Perhaps you prayed for one specific opportunity because you were convinced it was the doorway into your future. But what if that rejection redirected you toward work, purpose, or provision you would never have discovered otherwise? Perhaps you asked God to remove a difficult season immediately, yet somewhere inside that season you developed courage, discipline, wisdom, and discernment that comfort could never have taught you. This is where spiritual maturity becomes essential. Faith is not telling God how to perform the miracle. Faith is trusting that His wisdom reaches beyond the limits of your imagination. Isaiah speaks of God's ways being higher than human ways, and that truth becomes intensely personal when the answer does not resemble your expectation. You see one path because you know one version of the future. God sees what lies beyond turns you have not reached. The narrator describes Michael pointing toward two doors. One is familiar. You recognize it immediately because you have spent months, perhaps years, praying for it. The other looks different. It does not carry the name you expected. It does not satisfy your nostalgia. It requires you to release the story you rehearsed. And yet there may be peace around that unfamiliar door that you never experienced around the familiar one. Michael's symbolic instruction is simple. Do not choose familiarity over peace. This may be especially important around August 19th. You have heard that the miracle you gave up hoping for was confirmed 3 days ago, and your mind naturally wants to decide what that miracle must be. Resist that impulse. Let the title awaken hope without turning it into a prediction you force upon your circumstances. If God is directing something new, you do not want your attachment to one outcome to make you blind to another. Remember that answered prayer can sometimes arrive as redirection. Paul prayed concerning the thorn he wanted removed, yet the answer he received centered on sufficient grace and divine strength in weakness. The response did not match the request, but it carried something Paul needed. That biblical pattern should make you humble about assuming you already know what your miracle must look like. Maybe you asked for the past to return, while God is preparing you to build something new. Maybe you asked for recognition, while this season has been teaching you freedom from needing applause. Maybe you asked for immediate financial abundance, while the next answer begins with an idea, an opportunity, a disciplined decision, or wisdom that gradually changes your circumstances. Do not despise beginnings simply because they do not look spectacular. And do not compare your answer with someone else's testimony. Their restoration may involve returning. Yours may involve releasing. Their breakthrough may happen suddenly. Yours may unfold through consistent steps. Their door may open publicly. Yours may begin quietly where almost nobody notices. God does not need to repeat another person's story to demonstrate faithfulness in yours. This is why you must remain both hopeful and grounded. Do not turn every coincidence into confirmation. Do not force relationships, spend recklessly, abandon responsibilities, or make major decisions merely because something feels spiritually exciting. Pray. Examine. Seek wise counsel when necessary. Give healthy opportunities time to reveal their fruit. The answer worthy of your future should not require you to abandon wisdom in order to receive it. The narrator says Michael now asks one piercing question. If God answered differently, would you still recognize His goodness? That question exposes whether you desire God's direction or merely divine approval of your own plan. August 19th is inviting you to open your hands. Release the script. Release the exact timing. Release the demand that one particular person, door, or circumstance must become the evidence that God heard you. Hope again, but hope with open hands. Because the miracle may not be the return of what disappeared. The miracle may be discovering that what God is building next fits the person you have become far better than what you once begged Him to restore. And the next message will show you how to recognize genuine spiritual movement without allowing urgency, fear, or imagined signs to steal the sound mind God has given you. Type "I release my expectations" to God in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 919 symbolizes surrendered expectations, divine wisdom, renewed direction, and peace for what comes next. There is something Archangel Michael, as the narrator presents him, wants you to understand before you move one step further toward August 19th. If you have to live terrified in order to recognize what is happening, fear has already stolen the peace this message was meant to restore. You were never called to spend the next hours examining every stranger, questioning every family member, analyzing every dream, or treating every unexpected notification as a coded warning from heaven. That is not spiritual readiness. That is exhaustion. And after everything you have already endured, you do not need another reason to become afraid. You need clarity strong enough to remain peaceful even while you wait. 2 Timothy 1:7 reminds believers that God has not given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Notice what Scripture places together: power without panic, love without blindness, a sound mind without spiritual numbness. That is the posture the narrator says Michael is calling you toward now. You can be spiritually attentive without becoming suspicious. You can pray about an opportunity without immediately declaring it supernatural. You can notice an unusual circumstance without forcing it to become a sign. And you can trust God without believing you must decode every detail around you. Perhaps disappointment has made you especially vulnerable to that temptation. When you have waited a long time for something, suddenly everything can begin looking connected to it. A name appears twice and you wonder whether it means something. Someone contacts you unexpectedly and your heart races. A particular number catches your attention. A dream feels unusually vivid. You hear a sentence that seems perfectly timed. These experiences may feel meaningful, but wisdom does not rush to conclusions. Michael's symbolic warning is simple. Test what captures your attention before you surrender your peace to it. Because genuine guidance does not require paranoia. If something deserves your attention, you can bring it into prayer. You can examine the facts. You can wait. You can seek wise counsel. You can ask whether it aligns with Scripture, truth, integrity, and healthy judgment. What is good does not become less good because you took time to discern it. And what is false often becomes easier to recognize when urgency no longer controls you. This matters deeply because you have heard words like miracle, confirmation, heaven, and August 19th throughout this message. Those words can awaken tremendous expectation. But expectation must remain anchored. A date should never become a source of terror. If August 19th passes quietly, God has not abandoned you. If nothing dramatic occurs at midnight, your faith has not failed. The purpose of this message is to awaken hope and attentiveness, not to place God inside a countdown clock. The narrator describes Michael lowering his sword and pointing instead toward your heart. The battlefield requiring attention may not be somewhere outside you. It may be the battle between peace and panic inside your thoughts. Fear says, figure everything out immediately. Faith says, I can move when clarity comes. Fear says, if I miss one sign, everything will collapse. Wisdom says, what God truly intends for me does not require obsessive anxiety to sustain it. And this is where protection takes on a deeper meaning. Divine protection does not mean you will never encounter disappointment, difficulty, or uncertainty. It means fear does not have to become the ruler of your decisions. You can establish boundaries without accusing innocent people. You can protect your finances without believing someone is secretly stealing your destiny. You can step away from unhealthy relationships because of observable behavior rather than imagined spiritual conspiracies. You can be discerning while remaining compassionate. Listen carefully, because this may be the most freeing revelation yet. You do not have to hunt for the miracle. You do not have to manipulate circumstances until they resemble the promise you wanted. Continue your responsibilities. Keep praying. Keep making thoughtful decisions. Keep treating people with integrity. If an opportunity appears, examine it. If reconciliation becomes possible, look for genuine change. If provision arrives, steward it responsibly. If nothing happens immediately, remain steady. That steadiness is evidence of growth. The old version of you might have panicked. The wounded version might have chased. The exhausted version might have surrendered completely. But the person emerging now can stand between expectation and uncertainty and still possess peace. And that prepares you for what comes next. Because before an answer reaches your hands, your heart must be prepared to carry it. A miracle without wisdom can become another burden. An opportunity without preparation can become another missed season. Restoration without boundaries can recreate the wound you prayed to escape. So Michael's message becomes quieter now, but no less urgent. Guard your peace. Keep your mind clear. Let truth be stronger than excitement, and faith stronger than fear. August 19th does not require panic from you. It requires presence. Type I choose faith, wisdom, and a sound mind in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1027 symbolizes peace, discernment, spiritual courage, and clear-minded faith. There is a question the narrator says Archangel Michael places before you now, and it may be more important than asking when your miracle will arrive. If the answer appeared tomorrow, would you actually be prepared to carry it? You have spent so much time praying for the door to open that you may never have considered what will be required after you walk through it. You have imagined the relief, the celebration, the moment when you finally whisper, "God, you answered me." But receiving is only the beginning. What comes into your hands will eventually reveal what has been developed inside your heart, and that is why this final stage of preparation matters. Think about the prayer you almost abandoned. If it involved financial provision, have you developed the wisdom to steward greater resources instead of allowing old habits to consume them? If it involved an opportunity, are you prepared for the responsibility hidden behind the excitement? If you prayed for reconciliation, have you learned the difference between forgiveness and returning immediately to an unhealthy pattern? If you asked for greater influence, have you developed enough humility to carry attention without becoming controlled by it? Sometimes people desire the fruit of a new season while remaining emotionally attached to the habits of the previous one. The narrator describes Michael standing before you with a message that is firm but protective. Prepare before you possess. Scripture repeatedly connects stewardship with faithfulness. Joseph did not simply arrive in a position of influence. Years of difficulty had formed qualities he would need when responsibility increased. David was anointed before he was enthroned, and between those moments came a long season of formation. The promise mattered, but preparation mattered too. This changes the way you interpret the waiting. Perhaps you have spent months asking, "Why has nothing happened?" when another question was quietly waiting beneath it, "What is happening inside me?" Are you more patient than you were? Are you less desperate for approval? Can you recognize manipulation sooner? Can you hear no without allowing rejection to destroy your identity? Can you receive good news without immediately becoming terrified that it will disappear? These changes may not look like miracles, but they determine whether you can carry one wisely. August 19th, therefore, becomes a moment to examine your readiness rather than merely your expectations. Do not spend the entire day looking outward. Look inward too. Ask God to reveal where excitement could make you careless. Ask where fear could make you sabotage something healthy. Ask where pride could make you rush ahead without counsel. Ask where old wounds might cause you to misunderstand a new opportunity. Preparation is not pessimism. Preparation is respect for what you have been praying to receive. And if something does begin moving, resist the temptation to immediately tell everyone. Some beginnings need quiet before they need announcement. Give yourself room to pray. Let circumstances become clear. Let consistency reveal character. Let opportunities demonstrate substance beyond exciting promises. You do not need applause to validate something God is genuinely developing in your life. Sometimes wisdom protects a new beginning by refusing to expose it prematurely to unnecessary opinions. Michael's symbolic instruction becomes even stronger. Do not abandon your boundaries because something resembles your old prayer. If a person returns, listen to their actions as carefully as their words. If a financial opportunity appears, examine it responsibly rather than assuming urgency proves divine favor. If a new direction emerges, investigate it. Faith and careful judgment are not enemies. God gave you a mind to use alongside prayer. Perhaps the miracle itself is going to reveal how much you have changed. Something you once would have accepted instantly may now require discernment. Something you once chased may no longer attract you. Something you once believed would complete you may now appear smaller because you discovered that your identity cannot safely rest upon any person, position, amount of money, or human recognition. That is preparation. You are learning how to receive without worshiping what you receive. You are learning how to celebrate without becoming careless. You are learning how to forgive without surrendering wisdom. You are learning how to hope without demanding. You are learning how to walk toward an open door while remaining willing to stop if truth tells you it is not yours. And now the narrator says Michael turns your attention toward the final part of this message. Everything has been leading here. The prayer you stopped speaking, the mysterious 3-day imagery, the long silence, the closed door, the warning against fear, and the preparation happening inside you. The final question is no longer whether you can make the miracle happen. You cannot. The question is whether you can place what you buried in disappointment back into God's hands without trying to control what He does with it. Because sometimes the most powerful act of faith happens before anything changes externally. It happens when you open your hands and say, God, I still remember what I prayed for. But I trust you more than I trust my own picture of the answer. Type "prepare my heart," Lord, in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1112 symbolizes faithful stewardship, wisdom, readiness, and peace for whatever God places in your hands next. And now you have reached the final moment of this message. But the narrator says Archangel Michael does not want you to leave carrying the same weight you carried when you arrived. Think back to the prayer that started all of this. The prayer you once spoke with confidence. The miracle you pictured before disappointment taught you to stop picturing it. The possibility you quietly buried because expecting it became more painful than accepting its absence. You thought surrender meant never looking at it again. But now Michael's symbolic message reaches the deepest place in your heart and says, place it back into God's hands. Do not place it back into your anxiety. Do not place it back into obsession. Place it into His hands. August 19th has never needed to become a deadline that frightens you. Let it become a marker of renewed trust. Let it remind you of the day you stopped allowing yesterday's silence to dictate tomorrow's possibilities. You do not need to wake up demanding supernatural evidence. You do not need to watch every minute of the clock. You need only to remain open to the truth that God can still write chapters you cannot currently imagine. And those mysterious words remain. 3 days ago. Throughout this message, the third day has carried the biblical imagery of resurrection, reversal, and hope beyond apparent endings. Hold that imagery without turning it into superstition. You do not need to claim knowledge of secret heavenly events Scripture has not revealed. Instead, remember what resurrection faith teaches. What human eyes call finished does not automatically define the limits of God's power. Maybe your answer comes suddenly. Maybe it unfolds slowly. Maybe the miracle is restoration. Maybe it is redirection. Maybe the door returns. Or maybe you finally understand why it needed to remain closed. Whatever happens, the person standing here now is no longer the same person who first prayed. You have waited. You have questioned. You have survived disappointment. You have learned boundaries. You have discovered that faith can remain alive even when certainty disappears. The narrator describes Michael standing beside you now, not pushing you toward an outcome, but calling you toward courage. Do not worship the answer, the message declares. Trust the one to whom you gave the prayer. That distinction protects your heart. Because if your peace depends entirely upon one person returning, one amount of money appearing, one opportunity opening, or one circumstance changing, then the miracle has become responsible for something only God should carry. Open your hands. What you buried in disappointment does not need to remain buried in bitterness. Give God the dream. Give Him the unanswered question. Give Him the timeline you tried to control. Give Him the name you keep remembering. Give Him the opportunity you lost. Give Him the future you thought would already have arrived by now. And then say, Lord, if this belongs in my life, guide it according to your wisdom. If it does not, give me courage to receive what does. That is not defeated prayer. It is powerful surrender. Now something changes. You no longer have to chase confirmation. You no longer have to interpret every coincidence. You no longer have to fear that one missed moment will destroy your destiny. You can walk forward with a sound mind. You can pray without panic. You can hope without obsession. You can prepare without forcing. You can trust without pretending you know every detail. And if August 19th brings an unexpected conversation, examine it wisely. If it brings an opportunity, pray over it. If it brings clarity, receive it. If it passes quietly, remain faithful. God's goodness is not measured by whether one particular date produces the event you imagine. The narrator says Michael now gives the final declaration. Yesterday's disappointment will not become tomorrow's prophecy. The silence will not define you. The rejection will not name you. The closed door will not convince you that no door remains. Fear will not make your decisions. Admiration will not choose your relationship. Your past will teach you, but it will not command you. You will move with wisdom. You will hope with open hands. You will remain awake without becoming afraid. And perhaps that is the miracle already beginning inside you. The heart that once said, "I cannot survive another disappointment," is becoming strong enough to say, "Whatever God chooses, I will keep walking." So place the prayer back into His hands tonight. Not because you have been guaranteed the outcome you imagined, but because hope belongs somewhere safer than fear. Type "I place it in God's hands" in the comments if you receive this final message. Blessing code 819 symbolizes renewed hope, surrendered expectation, wisdom, and peace for the season ahead. And as you place your own prayer into God's hands, remember that somewhere another weary soul is searching for enough light to keep believing. Scripture pictures generosity as seed, and a freely planted seed can become part of a harvest you may never personally witness. If your heart says, "I want to help this word reach someone who has almost surrendered hope," you can support this mission through the PayPal donation link in every video description or through the QR code in the bottom right corner of this video. Your gift does not buy a miracle, purchase divine favor, or activate God's grace. His grace cannot be purchased. Instead, let your giving be a voluntary act of love that helps carry biblical encouragement toward another person standing in their own season of silence. May every willing giver walk in wisdom, peace, generosity, and faithful stewardship, knowing their support can help keep a light burning for someone else. If you feel freely led to strengthen this mission, use the PayPal link or QR code and help carry this message of hope forward.